Have you heard the news? The 12th Harbinger has finally been chosen. The rumors were true. On a carriage heading toward the border of Snezhnaya and Mondstadt, two Fatui diplomats named Mikhail and Ludmila were whispering about the Empress's latest announcement. For the longest time, the seats of the Harbingers had remained unchanged, but now, a 12th member had officially joined their ranks. The choice caught everyone off guard. His code name was the Instructor. Before this, he was just a member of the Fatui's special forces, specifically the instructor for the Fatui debt collectors. He was the one who taught them their martial arts and the business of debt collection. They even say that the special cloaking ability used by those agents was passed down from him. No one knew exactly why he had been promoted so suddenly. In Snezhnaya, it caused a massive stir. The reputation of the debt collectors wasn't exactly great across Teyvat, and that meant the instructor himself was often looked down upon. But in the end, no one dared to question the Tsaritsa's command. As for the 12th Harbinger himself, I was still in a complete state of shock. It didn't make any sense. Weren't the Harbingers supposed to be the strongest beings in the Fatui? Why on earth did they pick me? I stood there, my heart pounding as I looked back at the palace, which felt every bit as cold and piercing as the Tsaritsa herself. I wasn't excited because of the Empress's icy beauty. I was absolutely terrified. Unlike the other 11, I had been shoved into this position with zero preparation. It felt so surreal I thought I was dreaming. It wasn't until Pierrot, the very first Harbinger, personally handed me the delusion that represented my new status that reality finally hit me. I really was the 12th Harbinger. I wasn't originally from this land. You could tell just by my name, by Luo. Honestly, I wasn't even from this world. In my previous life, Snezhnaya was just a nation in a video game I played. One winter, I was walking by a river when I saw a child fall through the ice. I never considered myself a hero, but I couldn't just stand there and watch a kid drown. I saved him, but the cold and exhaustion dragged me under the ice instead. When I woke up, I was here in Snezhnaya. The Fatui took an interest in me because of my bravery, and I was brought into their ranks as a special case. Just like the rumors said, I was eventually appointed as the instructor for the debt collectors because of my unique invisibility. But there was one thing the rumors got wrong. My ability wasn't like theirs. It was far more special. It was a power inherited from a hero in another game, a man named Hay. It was as if the data of that character had been integrated into my very soul. To hide these strange powers, I bought a fake vision from a street vendor. He claimed it came from Inazuma across the ocean. The craftsmanship was so perfect that even real vision holders couldn't tell it was a fake. I chose a Nemo for my element. For the record, I'm tall enough that I don't need to climb over flower beds to see things. With these abilities, I climbed the ranks to become an instructor, but that still shouldn't have been enough to make me a Harbinger. Even Child, the 11th, got his seat through raw, terrifying combat ability. What did I have? Surely the Tsaritsa hadn't just taken a liking to my face. What are you thinking about? A heavy hand slammed onto my shoulder, making me jump. With my skills, very few people in Snezhnaya could sneak up on me like that. Unless, of course, it was one of them. I looked at the fur-lined coat and immediately recognized him. Lord Pulcinella, I said, reflexively bowing and using his code name. He was the 5th Harbinger, the Rooster. We're colleagues now, he said. No need for the formalities. Follow me. I have a new mission for you. Yes, sir, I replied, wiping sweat from my forehead. I wasn't used to my new identity yet. I didn't know Pulcinella well. In my old position, the highest-ranking person I ever dealt with was Child. The 5th seat was way out of my league. But he seemed decent enough. At least he didn't look like he wanted to eat me alive like some of the others. Child, especially. Ever since Pierrot gave me the delusion, Child had been trying to challenge me to a duel right there in the palace. If the Empress hadn't stepped in, I might have been forced into a fight to the death. I followed Pulcinella to an office-like room. He pulled out a document and set it in front of me. This is your appointment letter, he explained. Starting tomorrow, you will be the Snezhnayan envoy to Inazuma. You will be responsible for all Fatui affairs there. I reached for the paper, but my heart sank the moment I heard the word Inazuma. Was that place even fit for humans? I hadn't forgotten how badly Signora ended up in the game. She died and her ashes were practically scattered across the entire continent. Lord Pulcinella, I don't think I'm ready for such a heavy responsibility, I said. I knew I couldn't just say no. Refusing my first mission without a good reason would probably get me killed by the Tsaritsa. I felt like I was stuck between two paths, get obliterated by the Raiden Shogun, or get obliterated by the Empress. The fact that you became a harbinger proves you can handle it, Pulcinella said, his voice firm as he sat down. He wasn't budging. I had to go to Inazuma. Can I go to Mondstadt instead? I blurted out. Mondstadt was great. They had Klee and Diana. Most importantly, it was safe. I didn't have to worry about Barbados killing me. Mondstadt is Signora's target, Pulcinella said with a playful smirk. Are you sure you want to steal her mission? I shuddered. Signora wasn't the strongest, but she definitely wasn't someone I wanted to mess with right now. What about Liyue then? I suggested. Even though Morix is one of the oldest gods, I think I could make it work. Liyue was fine by me. Who could resist the charm of Keqing? Sure, there were a lot of adepti, but as long as I was careful, I'd be okay. Plus, I was Liwean in my past life. It felt like a valid reason. Pulcinella laughed. You'd have to discuss that with Child. I groaned. Everyone in the Fatui knew Child was itching to fight me. Going to him now would be like walking into a lion's den. Look, Pulcinella continued. According to our intel, Inazuma is currently under a lockdown. The internal state of the shogunate is unstable. Out of the 7 nations, it's currently one of the weakest. It's the perfect place for you. In other words, I didn't have a choice. I had no choice. I was going to Inazuma. The rumors spread through Snezhnaya like wildfire. Near Benlang Peak, 2 Fatui envoys whispered to each other from a carriage marked with our insignia. They were discussing the latest news. The Instructor was being deployed to the Land of Thunder. That Instructor was me. Despite my protests, the decision wasn't mine to make. White Deer, or Bai Luo, as I was known here, was officially heading to Inazuma. The only thing that made the trip bearable was my new traveling companion. When she first stood beside me, I actually felt like this mission might be worth it. She was elegant, dignified, and exceptionally beautiful. Sure, she was so tall that I had to look up just to make eye contact. But who would turn down a stunning, fair-skinned big sister type? She was a mirror maiden. Since this was my first overseas mission, Pulcinella decided I lacked experience. He assigned her to be my assistant. As part of Snezhnaya's special honor guard, her loyalty was absolute. Even if she wasn't thrilled about serving a brand new 12th Harbinger, she followed my every command. It was the Tsaritsa's will, after all. When we arrived at the docks, I saw our ride, a single, lonely sailboat. I wasn't happy. I was a Harbinger now. This felt a bit cheap. But then I heard that Child was literally walking all the way to Liyue on foot. Suddenly, a boat didn't seem so bad. At least they weren't making me swim. Once the crew boarded, I gave the order. The sails unfurled, the Snezhnayan flag caught the wind, and we began our journey away from the land of ice toward the islands of lightning. I wasn't a monster. Even though the Mirror Maiden was gorgeous, I wasn't going to abuse my power to hit on her. I sent her away and sat by the window. The sunlight hit the delusion in my hand. I pulled out the fake vision I had bought from Inazuma to compare them. Side by side, they looked almost identical, except for the regional casing styles. The delusion just looked a bit darker, a bit more ominous. There was one problem. Why did Pierrot give me a Dendro delusion? I wanted to complain. It wasn't that Dendro was weak, but in my old world, the word grass was basically an insult. It felt like he was mocking me. Also, I had no idea how to use it. Pierrot told me it worked just like a vision, but I'd never used a real vision in my life. My vision was just a piece of glass. Back when I first arrived in this world, I tried to research how these things worked. I used the name of the 3rd Harbinger, Doctor, to request files. My reports must have been useful to the doctor, because he looked the other way while I used his reputation. From what I gathered, visions were elemental organs granted by the gods to those they recognized. No one knew how they were born, they just appeared. When a user died, the vision became a hollow shell. They were nearly impossible to reactivate. I had thought about buying a real, masterless vision to play the part, but the price was insane. That's why I settled for a high-quality glass bead from Inazuma. According to real users, using a vision was like breathing or walking. It was an instinct. Since I didn't have that instinct, I just had to fake it. I tucked the fake Anemo vision into a hidden spot on my belt. I wore the real Dendro delusion out in the open where it was visible. At the very least, the delusion looked more intimidating. Captain Beidou, cargo ship ahead. A sailor shouted from the lookout of the Alcor. Beidou sat on the bow of the ship, drinking wine. She was a striking woman with long black hair and an eye patch over her left eye. Her red eyes were slightly hazy from the alcohol, but they remained sharp. She wore a traditional Liwian cheongsam and heavy boots. With one hand, she effortlessly swung a massive black claymore onto her shoulder. "Just a merchant ship?" she asked. She wasn't traveling with her full fleet this time. She didn't want to fight unless it was necessary. "Captain, that looks like a Snezhnayan Fatui ship," the sailor whispered, his voice trembling. The Fatui had a terrible reputation across Teyvat. It was a natural reaction. Beidou climbed to a higher vantage point and squinted. She saw the sails. At a sensitive time like this, what were the Fatui doing out here? "Captain, should we avoid them?" the sailor asked. He could see the Fatui ship signaling for them to move aside. Beidou took a long swig from her flask. She wiped her mouth and grinned. "Avoid them? Why?" she said. "I don't see a Fatui ship. I see a merchant ship. And it's perfectly normal for pirates to hijack a merchant ship, isn't it?" The Crux fleet weren't actually pirates. They were an armed fleet from Liyue. But out on the open sea, once you lowered the flag, no one knew the difference. Robbing the Fatui was practically a hobby for them. But the sailor started. An older, one-eyed crewmate cut him off. "You're new, right? Just listen to the big sister. If she says it's a merchant ship, it's a merchant ship. The ocean is our territory. I don't care who they are, they're getting robbed." The deck erupted in cheers. The crew scrambled, moving crates of ammo and positioning the cannons. They were ready for a fight. "Lower the flags," Beidou roared. "Fire!" The cannons thundered. A volley of shells screamed through the air, heading straight for my lonely little boat. Boom! A violent tremor shook the entire ship, nearly throwing me off my bed. I had been lying there, quietly reviewing the Inazuma plotlines in my head, when the world turned upside down. The thunderous roar of an explosion echoed through the hull. Someone was attacking us. I frowned. This was Snezhnayan territory on the high seas. Who in Teyvat would be brave, or stupid, enough to attack a ship flying the Fatui flag? "Instructor, we're under pirate attack." A Fatui member with a small, braided ponytail pounded on my door, his voice frantic. The maid managed to block the shells with a crystal shield for now, but should we return fire? The Fatui were used to swaggering across the continent without anyone daring to look them in the eye. Being jumped like this had clearly rattled them. I didn't say a word at first. I reached for the white mask hanging at my waist and pressed it onto my face. "Return fire," I said coldly. I stepped out of the cabin and onto the deck. My eyes immediately locked onto the vessel looming over our smaller boat. It was massive, several times our size, with a silhouette I knew all too well. The Alcor. And that meant the woman standing on its bow was Beidou. Back in the game, I'd spent plenty of time messing around on that ship. I had wondered who would have the guts to rob me, but seeing her, I wasn't surprised. This was exactly the kind of thing she'd do. I looked up. A woman holding a massive blackcliff slasher leaped high into the air, her silhouette cutting through the sun. She was coming straight for us. With a flick of my wrist, I drew my dagger and threw it. I triggered my skill, black. The blade whistled through the air, aimed directly at her. It was a piercing strike, a projectile designed to punch through multiple targets. It carried a lethal momentum. Beidou saw our ship was protected by some kind of elemental barrier, so she had jumped, intending to use her elemental power to shatter the water mirror and sink us in one go. She probably figured she'd just fish a few survivors out of the water later for questioning. But she hadn't expected me. Mid-air, she spotted a man in a trench coat standing on the deck. My mask was different from the standard Fatui gear. It covered my entire face, marked with a purple lightning bolt over the right eye that seemed to pulse with a faint light. Below that, a jagged red line stretched across the mask like a mocking, ominous smile. It didn't look like paint. It looked like dried blood. Beidou tightened her grip on her claymore. She saw me move. As my dagger tore through the water mirror and flew at her face, she reacted instantly. Clang. The dagger collided with her blackcliff slasher. Sparks and arcs of electricity exploded between them. The force was immense. Beidou was slammed backward, flying through the air until she crashed back onto the deck of the Alcor. The entire massive ship lurched downward from the impact, sending waves rippling out across the once calm sea. That power, Beidou muttered, her eyes wide with shock. The dagger spun through the air like a boomerang, returning perfectly to my hand. Beidou slowly opened her right hand. Her palm was torn, blood seeping from the webbing of her thumb. Strands of purple electricity were still dancing across her skin. Even though she held a vision with the power of Electro, this wasn't her own energy. She had been knocked back because that electricity had numbed her entire body, freezing her muscles for a split second. A casual toss from me had done that. "You there, the one in charge," Beidou called out, propping her claymore over her shoulder. She stepped up to the railing, trying to sound casual. "How about we talk? If the entire Crux fleet were here, she wouldn't have hesitated to take us down. But she only had the Alcor, and her top fighters weren't with her. She couldn't risk a full-blown war. Why did you attack us?" I asked, my voice muffled and distant behind the mask. I sheathed my dagger. Sorry. Beidou laughed heartily, though her eyes remained sharp. "I didn't realize you were friends from Snezhnaya. I thought you were Inazuman Ronin. My mistake." She gave a subtle nod to one of her crewmen. The man scrambled over and hauled up a heavy barrel of fine booze. Beidou lifted the wooden cask with one hand and tossed it toward our ship. The maid standing beside me waved her hand. A surge of seawater rose up like a gentle hand, catching the barrel and setting it down softly next to me. "Top-shelf dandelion wine from Mondstadt," Beidou said. "Consider it compensation." In Teyvat, Mondstadt's wine and Liyue's food were the ultimate currencies. Out on the ocean, a barrel of dandelion wine was usually enough to settle any grudge. "You think a single barrel of wine settles a debt with the Fatui?" I stepped onto the barrel, my voice flat and unreadable. As I spoke, the maid changed her hand gestures. The water mirrors surrounding our ship began to shift. Shimmering ice shards, sharp as glass, pivoted and aimed directly at the Alcor. Beidou's expression tightened. "Look, the Crux fleet has a decent relationship with your Harbinger, child. For his sake, why don't we let this slide?" She was bluffing. She barely knew Child, but she wasn't above using his name to get out of a tight spot. Behind her back, she was already signaling her crew to prepare for a fight. She wanted to talk her way out, but she wouldn't back down if I pushed. "Child," I repeated. Beidou felt a slight shift in my tone. She breathed a small sigh of relief, thinking the name had worked. "And do you know who I am?" I asked. I started twirling the uniquely shaped dagger between my fingers. Beidou glanced at her crew, but they all shook their heads. They knew about the 11th Harbinger, Child, since he had been active in Liyue recently. But they didn't recognize me. "Instructor," I said clearly. "I am the 12th Fatui Harbinger. Code name, the Instructor." Beidou went pale. She thought she had caught a small fish, then realized it was a big one. Now, she realized she had hooked a shark. The Harbingers represented the peak of the Fatui's power. It explained why a casual throw had nearly crippled her arm. This wasn't going to be an easy escape. In reality, I had just been lucky. That dagger toss had triggered a critical hit, which activated my passive skill, Shock. On a crit, my attacks attach a surge of electricity that binds the target for half a second. Mid-air, that half second had stripped Beidou of all her momentum and elemental defense. It created the illusion that I had overwhelmed her with pure strength. But if a real fight started now, things would get complicated fast. I wasn't necessarily stronger than Beidou, but I knew my role. As an assassin with the power of invisibility, I specialized in burst damage and sudden strikes. On solid ground, I could have taken her easily, but we were on the ocean, her backyard. I had zero experience with naval combat, and a head-on clash wouldn't end well for me. My best move was to use my title to scare her off. When she mentioned Child, my head started to ache. It wasn't fear, it was annoyance. Back in Snezhnaya, everyone knew that the 11th Harbinger, Child, was obsessed with picking a fight with me, the 12th. I wasn't afraid of much, but I dreaded that guy. You can talk to the other Harbingers, but Child? He fights first and asks questions later. The moment Beidou called it a misunderstanding, I was ready to leave. But I stayed, pretending to be offended. It wasn't about honor. I had just become a harbinger, and everyone knew I was the most shameless, least honorable person in the organization. If I cared about honor, I wouldn't have trained so many Fatui debt collectors. I was stalling for a skill called Silver. It had a passive effect that let me see any vision holder within 3 kilometers who was heavily injured, while giving me a permanent boost to armor penetration. But the active effect was what I needed. It allowed me to mark a target and share their vision for a set time. The catch? While marking someone, I couldn't move, attack, or stay invisible. The progress bar for the skill was sitting at 70%. I needed it to hit 100 before things turned ugly. "You're from Liyue, aren't you?" I asked suddenly. I spoke in a perfect Liyue accent, specifically the southern Lisha flavor. Beidou froze. She didn't expect a Fatui harbinger from Snezhnaya to sound like a local. She looked at the skin on my neck, confirming I was indeed from Liyue. She was confused. How did someone like me end up as a harbinger? "How is Chi-Chi from Bubu Pharmacy doing lately?" I asked. Beidou was even more stunned. Only locals knew about the herb-gathering zombie girl, Chi-Chi. Foreigners might notice her outfit, but they never cared about her name. She's fine. Doing well," Beidou stammered, trying to process the information. I glanced at the progress bar over her head. It was almost done. I turned to a Fatui subordinate with a small ponytail and whispered a few orders. He looked confused but hurried into the cabin, returning with a wooden crate. I could hear glass jars clinking inside. Under my command, a mirror maiden used a wave to gently float the crate over to Beidou's ship. "What is this?" Beidou asked, eyeing the box. "A gift for Chi-Chi," I said. "Tell her it's from Xiaobai." "Xiaobai?" Beidou's mind immediately went to Baiju, the owner of Bubu Pharmacy. Was I related to him? No, my hair was black, and I looked nothing like him. "For the sake of Child and Chi-Chi, I'll let this go," I said, grabbing a bottle of dandelion wine from the deck as a parting trophy. "Don't let me catch you again." With those parting words, the tension broke. Our ships turned and began sailing in opposite directions. I headed back into my cabin, satisfied. The progress bar had hit 100%. Now, the leader of the Crux fleet was marked. Even when we reached Inazuma, I would know exactly where she was. Did I actually know Chi-Chi? Yes, but she didn't know me. I used her name because she was a zombie with a legendary bad memory. Even if Beidou or Ningguang asked her about Xiaobai, she wouldn't remember a thing. But if she received that gift, she would definitely write the name in her notebook. Because inside that crate was coconut milk. On the Alcor, Beidou wasn't taking any chances. She had her ship's alchemist inspect the crate. When they opened it, they found jars of a simple, milky liquid. The alchemist confirmed it was just ordinary coconut milk. Beidou knew Chi-Chi, but she had no idea the girl was obsessed with the stuff. She couldn't wrap her head around why a Fatui harbinger would send a zombie a crate of milk. "Captain," a one-eyed sailor asked as they resealed the box. "Are we still going to Inazuma?" "Change of plans," Beidou ordered. "Turn the ship around. We're going back to Liyue. This 12th harbinger is too strange. We need to report this immediately." She looked at an envelope stamped with the Sangonomiya crest. The resistance in Inazuma could wait. This intel was more important. As the Alcor sailed away, Beidou stood on the lookout tower, staring at my ship as it vanished into the lightning storms. "Xiaobai, huh?" she whispered. Soon, I reached the borders of Inazuma. It was a nation of islands surrounded by eternal thunderstorms, ruled by the Raiden shogun, who obsessed over eternity. Most sailors feared these storms, but I had a secret weapon, the mirror maidens. The rooster had been smart to send them with me. Their water mirrors could refract the lightning, creating a safe path through the chaos. My fragile-looking sailboat glided through the crashing waves and blinding bolts, finally breaking through the storm wall into the calm waters beyond. Even I had to admit, the scene was breathtaking. Back in my old world, no phone could have ever rendered a storm this terrifying. The sheer scale of the lightning and the crashing waves was enough to crash any game engine. I looked at the mirror maiden. She had just finished retracting her water mirrors, her breathing heavy. Guiding a whole ship through that chaos had clearly drained her. "Go rest," I told her. "I'll handle the rest." She didn't argue. She gave me a respectful bow and disappeared into the cabin. I ordered the crew to make sure she was well-fed and comfortable. Then, I pulled out my dagger. I threw it toward the lookout tower, and with a soft click of the mechanism, the steel wires zipped me up to the top. I looked toward the horizon. A red island sat at the edge of the sea. It was Ritu. Even though I had seen this place countless times on a screen, seeing it in person felt surreal. It felt like I was stepping into a dream. I was finally entering the land of eternity. According to my intel, the Raiden Shogun had already issued the Sakoku Decree and the Vision Hunt Decree. The Fatui had been busy whispering in her ear long before I arrived. My mission was simple: find an opening, take the Shogun's Gnosis, and bring it back to Snezhnaya. At least, that was the plan on paper. Every time I thought about it, my head hurt. On the surface, Inazuma looked like the easiest target of all the nations. But I knew the truth. The Raiden Shogun sitting in Tenshikaku wasn't the real god, Balzabul. It was just a puppet. Even if I managed to reach the real EI in her plane of euthymia, I couldn't beat her. More importantly, she didn't even have the Gnosis. After the war in Kenria, she had cut all ties with Celestia. She had handed her Gnosis over to Yae Miko at the Grand Narukami Shrine. Yae Miko was the head shrine maiden and the god's familiar. She once joked that even if she dodged the Shogun's blade, she'd still be in trouble. In my opinion, the only person who could take a hit from the Shogun and survive was probably Child. It would probably take 3 hits to finish him off. First things first, I muttered. Let's just get on the island. I was arriving as a Snezhnayan envoy. For now, the Shogun had no reason to strike me down. Ritu was the gateway for all foreigners. During the lockdown, you couldn't step foot on the main island without passing through here first. The place was covered in maple trees and governed by the Kanto Commission. Normally, you needed mountains of paperwork and special connections just to leave the port. Without them, you were stuck in a depressing fishing village with the rest of the stranded travelers. Luckily, I was the 12th Harbinger. The Fatui had already infiltrated the Kanto and Tenryu commissions. In Inazuma, the Tri-Commission ran everything. The Yashiro Commission, led by the Kamisato clan, handled culture and festivals. The Tenryu Commission, under the Kuju clan, handled security and the military. Then there was the Kanto Commission, which managed the nation's finances and border control. Both the Tenryu and Kanto commissions had the power to issue travel permits. As my boat pulled into the harbor, the view became clear. Unlike the snowy ports of Snezhnaya, the docks here were covered in crimson maple leaves. It was strangely quiet. Aside from a few small fishing boats, there wasn't a single merchant ship in sight. For a major port, it looked ghost-like. As we neared the dock, the Inazuman soldiers didn't reach for their weapons. They stood up straight, acting like they were welcoming a VIP. A group of Fatui Pyro agents was already waiting. "Instructor," they shouted in unison. If there was anyone in Teyvat who truly respected me, it was the Pyro agents. I had trained almost every single one of them. "Long time no see, Achi," I said, stepping off the boat. In the Fatui Special Forces, names didn't exist. They only had codes. You only got a name back once you left training to serve the Tsaritsa. My code was BK-201. His was 9527. I wasn't joking. He was literally the 9527th person to join the ranks. "Instructor, I've already arranged a feast of authentic Liyue cuisine at the trade company," Achi said. "Consider it a welcome dinner." It wasn't a secret that I was originally from Liyue. In the Fatui, strength mattered more than where you were born. Signora was from Mondstadt, and another Harbinger was even from Inazuma. "Forget the dinner," I replied. "I have urgent business. Arrange a way to get me to Inazuma City as soon as possible." Ritu was pretty, but the people I needed to see were in the city. I wanted to see the sights for myself. As I walked, I noticed a fox statue near the pier. These statues were everywhere in Inazuma, but this one felt different. I felt like it was watching me. Meanwhile, back in Liyue, the Jade Chamber floated high above the clouds. This flying palace belonged to Ningguang, the Tianquan of the Liyue Qixing. On a clear day, you could see the entire harbor from its deck. It was a symbol of her absolute wealth and power. It started as a small room, but now it was large enough to block out the sun. Usually, guests weren't allowed here. But today was different. "I thought you were on your way to Inazuma," Ningguang said, looking up. "Why are you back so soon?" Beidou walked across the deck. She had her massive blackcliff slasher slung over one shoulder and a wooden crate in her other hand. Only she could walk onto the jade chamber looking that casual. Something happened on the way, Beidou grunted. I felt it was necessary to come back and let you know, Beidou said. She didn't wait for an invitation. She picked up a teacup from the table and drained it in one gulp. Then, she frowned. To a woman like her, tea was a poor substitute for wine. It was practically hard to swallow. Ningguang was sitting by the railing, looking out over the night lights of Liyue Harbor. She didn't turn around. The fatui, she said softly. Beidou nearly choked on a tea leaf. She stared at Ningguang in surprise. She had wanted to play a little game, keep the news a secret for a moment to tease her, but Ningguang had already guessed it. We both know how important the Inazuma resistance is, Ningguang said with a light chuckle. Only the fatui could make you turn your ship around halfway. Beidou's trip to Inazuma wasn't just about helping the resistance. She was my eyes and ears, tasked with investigating the fatui's movements there. It seemed the news she brought back was worth more than anything happening on the front lines. The fatui have a 12th harbinger, Beidou said, her voice dropping. Have you heard? Of course, Ningguang replied. I put a lot of effort into my intelligence network. Snezhnaya's fatui are always finding excuses to station themselves in other nations. It's only natural we have our own people inside theirs. An hour after the fatui announced their new harbinger, the news had reached the Jade Chamber. All Ningguang knew was that this man was the instructor of the pyro agents. She didn't know his face. She didn't know his strength. Did you know he used to be from Liyue? Beidou whispered. Ningguang finally turned. Her eyes widened. Liyue. Exactly. His accent is from the Lisha area. He doesn't just speak our language. He has old friends here. He asked me to bring this back. Beidou pushed a wooden crate forward with her foot. Her crew had already checked it for traps or poison, and it was clean. But she wanted Ningguang to see it before it reached its final destination. Ningguang pulled out a bottle and sniffed it. Coconut milk? She rarely drank the stuff, but she knew the scent well because of a very specific person in Liyue Harbor. He knows Chi-Chi, Ningguang said, her brow furrowing for the first time that day. On the surface, Chi-Chi was just a herb gatherer and apprentice at Bubu Pharmacy. In reality, she was an ancient being with an immortal body. According to what Ningguang knew, Chi-Chi didn't have any friends in Snezhnaya. But then again, Chi-Chi was much older than Ningguang. She had lived a long time. Did the instructor say anything else? Ningguang asked. He said it's a gift for Chi-Chi. He told me to tell her it was from Xiaobai. Beidou made sure to repeat the name exactly as I had told her. Xiaobai, Ningguang repeated. Just like Beidou, she immediately thought of the owner of Bubu Pharmacy, Baizhu. The name fit. Someone who knew Chi-Chi and used the name, Bai, had to be connected to him. Beidou took a swig from her own hip flask. Is it possible he just knows about Baizhu and Chi-Chi? Maybe he's just trying to make us paranoid. No, Ningguang said firmly. Hardly anyone in Liyue knows Chi-Chi loves coconut milk. Only those closest to her. He really knows her. And you said he has a Lisha accent? South Lisha, specifically, Beidou confirmed. I have sailors from that region on my ship. I'd know that accent anywhere. Ningguang looked toward the distant mountains of Lisha. She remembered asking Chi-Chi once why she liked that specific milk. Chi-Chi had told her it was a gift from a friend in Lisha. It was cool and delicious. Ningguang had even sent the Millilith to investigate back then, but they found nothing but treasure hoarders. Was that friend the same person who was now the 12th harbinger? Let's go, Ningguang said, waving her hand. Geo Energy lifted the crate of milk into the air. We're going to Bubu Pharmacy. Chi-Chi has a bad memory, but she keeps a diary. We might find a trace of this Xiaobai in her notes. Back in Ritu, the streets were deserted. The night air was cold. I sat by the window of my temporary residence, sipping tea and looking toward Inazuma City. Instructor, Achi said, standing behind me. Are you sure you don't want to meet the representatives from the Hiragi or Kuju clans? I'm not interested in flattery, I replied. Before I was a harbinger, I had to deal with those people because I had no choice. Now, I was at the top of the food chain. My status in the Inazuma branch of the fatui was absolute. I could afford to be a little rude. Fair enough, Achi nodded. You are the Tsaritsa's official envoy. It shouldn't be some low-level officials greeting you anyway. It should be the Raiden Shogun herself. I spat my tea right across the room. Achi, I coughed. Yes, instructor? That was a great point. Never say it again. My mission was to take the shogun's gnosis, but the last thing I wanted was to stand in front of her. First, she didn't even have the gnosis. Second, I didn't feel like being turned into ash by her blade. I miss Liua, I muttered. Achi started to go over the schedule for tomorrow, but I raised my hand to stop him. After years of training together, he knew what that gesture meant. The trip from Snezhnaya was long, I said. I'm tired. We'll talk tomorrow. Understood, instructor. Achi backed out and closed the door quietly. I let out a long yawn and set my teacup down on the table. My body felt heavy. I walked toward the bed, unfastening the heavy, ornate Snezhnayan coat that marked my status as a harbinger. As the last button popped loose, I didn't just drop the garment. I grabbed the collar and whipped it forward with a violent snap. Swoosh! A specialized dagger, hidden perfectly by the swinging fabric, flew from my hand. It thudded deep into the wooden ceiling beam above. Crack! A mechanical device at my waist whirred to life. Using a hidden wire, I launched myself upward, flipping through the air and landing silently on the high beam. I expected an assassin. Instead, I found a small, round object tucked away in the shadows. It was a Daruma doll, crafted in a distinct Inazuman style. It was hidden incredibly well. If I weren't an expert in concealment myself, this little thing would have fooled me completely. We stared at each other for a heartbeat. Then, it moved first. Yuhuart, Mujina Flurry. The Daruma erupted in a brilliant teal glow. A violent gale suddenly whipped through the room, tearing at the curtains and scattering papers. In the chaos, a tiny silhouette leaped out from the doll. The figure hit the floor, rolled once, and dived straight out the open window. I looked down at the door. Achi was standing there, looking completely bewildered. I could tell what he was thinking. Do these ninja types ever use the front door? Achi, check the room for clues, I barked. I'm going after it. Understood, instructor. I didn't wait for him to finish. I vaulted out the window, my boots hitting the pavement as I sprinted under the moonlight. I kept my eyes locked on that small shadow darting ahead of me. Yuhuart, Windwheel State. The figure noticed me gaining ground and panicked. I saw a bushy tail practically stand on end with fright. Whoever this was, they knew exactly how dangerous I was. They leaped into the air, hands flashing through a series of ritual signs, and tucked their legs into a tight ball. When they hit the ground, they didn't run, they spun. Powered by the wind, they turned into a literal human wheel, rolling across the ground at high speed. They pulled ahead of me instantly, heading straight for the dense forest at the edge of town. I could almost feel their relief. They thought if they reached those trees, I'd never find them. But to my eyes, this was a rookie mistake. That elemental skill was fast, sure, but it was loud. It left a massive trail. The grass was flattened into a clear path that even a blind man could follow. Even when the ground got too hard to leave a print, the elemental energy lingering in the air was like a neon sign pointing the way. I followed the trail until I reached the treeline. During the day, this place probably looked peaceful. At night, it was a nightmare. The wind hissed through the leaves like 1,000 whispers. If I listened closely, I could hear high-pitched giggling buried in the breeze. I flicked my wrist, and my dagger slid back into my palm. I stepped into the woods. Asterisk caw? Caw. Asterisk the moment my foot touched the forest floor, a massive cloud of crows erupted from the branches. They screamed in a chorus of ugly, jarring cries before vanishing into the dark. I've always hated crows. I kept moving, but things were getting difficult. The ninja had finally realized they were being tracked. After the crows cleared out, the trail went cold. The shadows in the bushes seemed to shift and dance, creating the illusion of people standing everywhere and nowhere at once. The thick canopy blocked out the moon, leaving me in near total darkness. The only light came from clusters of strange blue flowers blooming at the base of the trees. They glowed with an eerie, ghostly luminescence that made the mossy statues scattered around look like frozen monsters. Even a local wouldn't dare stay here long. And yet, I wasn't alone. Who are you? A voice demanded. A woman stood a few paces away, holding a bamboo basket. She had short, sharp hair and wore the high-ranking armor of the shogunate's military. It was far more elegant than a standard soldier's gear. But the most striking thing was the red, crow-billed mask perched on the side of her head. For a second, I wondered if she was one of us. The Fatui love our masks. But I knew our ranks, and she didn't fit. I lowered my hand, hiding my dagger back up my sleeve. I realized exactly who she was. She wasn't human. She was a Tengu, a creature of myth, and the general of the Commission's forces. This was Kuju Sarah. Sarah wasn't actually a Kuju by blood. She had been born in a quiet mountain forest, but when monsters attacked her home, she had been thrown from a cliff. Her wings were broken. As she fell toward her death, the gods noticed her. She received a vision, and the glow of that power caught the attention of the Kuju clan, who adopted her and raised her as a weapon of the shogunate. Even though she lived among humans, she never lost her forest instincts. She came here often to train or to bring fruit to the local baked danuki, those mischievous little forest spirits who loved to steal food. She had heard the crows and felt the elemental disturbance I caused. She had come to make sure the spirits weren't being bothered by a vision wielder. She stared at me, her brow furrowed. She saw the weapon I had just hidden. She saw the Fatui insignias on my clothes. And she saw my mask. We were both looking at each other's masks, thinking the exact same thing. Is that one of ours? There are many monsters in these woods, Sarah said, her voice cold but professional. You shouldn't stay here. If you have lost something, report it to the Tenryu Commission. We will handle the registration and recovery. Normally, Sarah wouldn't be this polite to a stranger, especially a member of the Fatui. But in this desolate, pitch-black forest, even a general was being cautious. Killing a Fatui member in these woods would have been easy for someone like her. But Sarah's clan head had warned her, do not provoke the Fatui. They were here as official envoys of Snezhnaya. A conflict now would create a diplomatic rift, and more importantly, it would bring trouble to the Raiden shogun. To Sarah, the shogun was everything. She remembered falling from that cliff years ago, her wings shattered, waiting for death. In that moment, the shogun had glanced her way. That single look gave Sarah the strength to survive and the power she wielded today. She could ignore her clan head, but she would never do anything to inconvenience her god. The forest is dangerous at this hour, Sarah said, her eyes shifting toward the small forest spirits watching us from the shadows. If you don't mind, I will lead you out. She didn't trust me. She especially didn't want a dangerous Fatui operative wandering near the baked danuki. For the spirits, I was a walking disaster. That works for me, I replied instantly. I wanted to stay near her. As a trusted aide to the shogun, she was the perfect target for a tracker. I needed to use my silver ability to mark her. If I succeeded, navigating Inazuma later would be much easier. Follow me, she commanded. She glanced at the delusion hanging from my waist before turning her back to me. She looked confident, but I could see her muscles were tense. Her wings were ready to unfurl at a moment's notice. She expected a backstab, confident her Tengu reflexes would let her dodge and counterattack. She was wrong. I wasn't going to attack. If I did, the marking process would reset, and I'd lose all my progress. I just walked behind her, watching the progress bar in my mind slowly fill up. Sarah moved through the jagged rocks and tangled roots with impossible grace. Even in high wooden Geta sandals, she was as steady as if she were walking on flat pavement. She didn't even need her wings. But as the minutes turned into an hour, I started to worry. The marking process was finished, yet we were still deep in the mountains. I didn't remember walking this far in. Was she leading me into a trap? Was she planning to execute me in some remote corner where no one would find the body? I flicked my wrist. Thanks to a hidden wire, my dagger slid silently into my hand. I liked Sarah as a character, but if she tried to kill me, I wasn't going to die being polite. Finally, the trees thinned out. We reached the edge of the woods. The Tenryu Commission has matters to attend to, Sarah said, her voice echoing in the cool night air. Watch your step while you are in Inazuma. If you break our laws, the Shogun's lightning is every bit as fierce as your Cryo-Archon's power. With a sudden flap of black wings, she took to the sky, soaring toward the distant lights of Inazuma City. She left me standing alone at the edge of the wilderness. I looked around, feeling a headache coming on. Where the hell was I? I knew Teyvat like the back of my hand from the game, but the real Inazuma was massive and far more complex. I wasn't even sure if I was still on Ridu. I couldn't go back through the forest. My only choice was to find civilization, or better yet, my own people. Luck was on my side. In the dirt nearby, I spotted a familiar mark. It was a Fatui trail sign. I followed the symbols through the dark until I saw a flash of red. It was a temporary camp made of heavy Sneznayan canvas. The camp was simple but well kept. Straw was laid out over the ground, topped with soft cotton pads. I saw a delicate tea set and some daily supplies near a makeshift pillow. A faint, pleasant scent lingered in the air. I started to look for whoever was stationed here when a voice whispered from the shadows. "Found you." Crackling purple sparks lit up the darkness. A Sisson mage emerged, her lantern glowing with electro-energy. She quickly used the sparks to light a small campfire under a pot of water. "Sit, sit," she said enthusiastically, dusting off a seat for me. "I don't have much, but I have snacks and tea." Her name was Xenia. She was a bit too friendly, likely because she hadn't seen a fellow Fatui member in ages. To the world, we were villains, but among ourselves, the bond was usually ironclad. I told her I'd gotten lost in the woods, and she didn't doubt me for a second, despite my foreign appearance. "Black tea, milk, or firewater?" she asked, rummaging under her pillow. She pulled out a jar and 2 bottles. "Or maybe a mix of everything?" "Have you forgotten the manual?" I asked, my voice stern. Fatui vanguards are strictly forbidden from carrying firewater during a mission. Firewater was the lifeblood of Sneznaya. It was a spirit so strong it was originally used as medicine before people realized it made the cold nights much more bearable. "Oh, who cares?" Xenia laughed. "Out here in the wilds of Inazuma, I'm the boss." She clearly thought I was just some new recruit picked up locally who didn't understand how things really worked. She ignored my warning and began cleaning her tea set with boiling water. She brewed a pot of black tea and, seeing how young I looked, added a generous splash of milk before handing a cup to me. Xenia didn't give up. She leaned in, eyes gleaming with a stubborn persistence. "Are you sure you don't want any firewater? If we ever make it back to Sneznaya, I'll treat you to the good stuff. Top shelf." "Maybe another time," I replied, keeping my voice steady. I took the cup of milk tea from her. I had to admit, the aroma was surprisingly good. I'd attended plenty of high-class tea parties back in Sneznaya, hosted by the ladies of the court, but I'd never smelled anything quite this flavorful. I took a slow, appreciative sip. "The tea leaves are stolen from the Nobushi," Xenia chirped, her voice full of pride. "And the milk. I scooped that right out of a Hilichurl's cooking pot. Good, right?" I didn't even have time to swallow. I sprayed the liquid right out of my mouth, a fine mist of stolen tea and monster milk hitting the dirt. The complex, rustic flavor I'd been enjoying a second ago suddenly tasted like a crime against humanity. "Oh, you youngsters," Xenia sighed, not looking surprised at all. "You don't know how to appreciate anything." She didn't seem to care. She'd seen worse. In the Fatui, there were missions where we didn't even have this much. When things got truly desperate, we had to rely on hydro slimes for water. They were basically just concentrated elemental deposits, and while they could save your life in a pinch, drinking them straight was toxic. Without immediate treatment, the side effects could last a lifetime. To a veteran like Xenia, Hilichurl milk was a luxury. "How long have you been stationed here?" I asked, looking up at the tattered canvas of her makeshift shelter. I needed to change the subject before she told me anything else about that cooking pot. "I've forgotten," she said, her gaze drifting. "Out here in the wilds, time doesn't exist. I spend my days teasing Hilichurls and robbing the Nobushi. I was here before the Vision Hunt decree even started." She took a massive swig of firewater. Even though it was a product of the freezing north, the way she gulped it down made her face flush with a warm glow. Usually, a lady wouldn't drink like that, but this wasn't Sneznaya. This was Inazuma. "Firewater is rare here," she muttered, staring at the bottle. "Every drop is precious. Even if I rob a merchant caravan or sneak into Inazuma City, I can't find the authentic stuff. But when a friend shows up, that's different. Firewater is meant to be shared. If you don't drink big gulps together, the atmosphere is ruined." She leaned over and slapped me on the back with a heavy, drunken hand. "Listen, newbie, don't worry about what people think of us. We're Fatui. We're following the Tsaritsa to do great things. I might look like I'm struggling now, but once this Inazuma job is over, I'll go back and be an officer. If anyone bullies you then, just say my name." She was definitely drunk. Her breath smelled like pure alcohol, and her strikes were getting heavier. If I hadn't been trained for this, she probably would have given me internal injuries. By the way, she said, finally remembering her manners. We've been talking all this time, and I haven't asked. I'm Xenia. What's your name? Lin Yuan, I said. Xenia paused, the bottle halfway to her lips. She lived in Inazuma long enough to know the local naming conventions, and my name didn't fit. It sounded like it came from across the ocean. Are you from Liyue? She asked. I knew the Fatui had been cooperating with Liyue lately, though she probably didn't know the details. She looked a bit wistful. I had a friend from the House of the Hearth who went to Liyue with her brother to do something big. Lucky Katarina. She's probably eating like a queen at Xinyue kiosk right now. I'm so jealous. I am from Liyue, I confirmed. But I live in Snezhnaya now. I joined the Fatui after I jumped into a frozen river to save a child during winter. The higher-ups liked my spirit. I felt a bit of a sting saying that. Back then, I just wanted to save a life. I didn't expect that when I climbed out of that water, I wouldn't be on Earth anymore. I'd be in the middle of a snowy wasteland in Teyvat. Xenia chuckled. Your story sounds like someone I heard about. They say there's a guy who did something similar and became a harbinger. Imagine that. I wonder if we'll ever become harbingers. She had no idea. She didn't realize the young man sitting next to her, the one she'd tricked into drinking hilichurl milk, was the very Lord Instructor she spoke of. It wouldn't be until years later, when she saw a familiar figure standing beside the tsaritsa, that she'd realize who she had met in the woods of Inazuma. Meanwhile, back in Liyue, life followed a different rhythm. They say there are 4 bitters in life: birth, old age, sickness, and death. Sickness is the one no one can escape. Thankfully, Liyue has Bubu Pharmacy. No matter the ailment, a visit to Mr. Baiju usually results in a cure. People travel from Mondstadt and Sumeru just to see him. The pharmacy sits in the northwest of the city, surrounded by mountains and water. It's a peaceful place. Even if you aren't sick, walking through the pavilions and watching the koi swim through the lotus ponds of Mt Tianheng can soothe the soul. But Guei, the pharmacist's assistant, didn't feel very peaceful. Between sorting herbs and dealing with the constant croaking of frogs and chirping of insects at night, he felt like his head was going to explode. Chi-Chi, Guei called out, looking toward the pond. Just 7 lotus heads. Don't pick more than that. Okay. Chi-Chi understands, a small voice replied. A young girl with pale skin and tiny bare feet stood in the water. Her response was delayed, her voice flat. Normally, someone her age shouldn't be doing dangerous work, but Chi-Chi's daily routine was far more intense than picking lotuses. She climbed the cliffs of Qingyun Peak and searched the ruins of Duanyu Heap for rare herbs. She was the pharmacy's primary gatherer. It wasn't child labor. If you went by her actual age, she was older than Guei's great-great-grandfather. She was a zombie, an accidental intersection of the adepti and the undead. Guei, still working this late? A sharp, commanding voice asked. It's that girl from the Qin family, Guei grumbled, not looking up. She can't stand the taste of bitter medicine. She's not like Lady Ningguang. He froze. The voice was familiar. He turned around, and his eyes went wide with panic. Relax, Ningguang said, waving a hand. I'm not here to check your books today. I'm looking for Mr. Baiju. Guei swallowed hard. Even at Bubu Pharmacy, people knew better than to be casual with the Tianquan of the Liyue Qixing. That's unfortunate, my lady. Mr. Baiju left for Qingce village to see a patient. He isn't home. Should I send someone to notify him? Guei asked, breaking the silence. Qingce village is on the other side of Wuwang Hill. It's a quiet place, practically a retirement home. Life there is easy, surrounded by mountains and water, but it's too quiet for the young people. Most of them leave for Liyue Harbor. He sighed, looking toward the horizon. Only the elderly and children are left now. Mr. Baiju goes there often to provide free checkups. It's a long trip. Ningguang shook her head. No need to disturb his work. I just want a private word with Chi-Chi. She looked at the pond. Chi-Chi was standing there, staring at 5 lotus heads in her hand. She looked conflicted, trying to decide if she should pick 7 or 9. Guei hesitated. Baiju had given him strict orders never to let anyone get too close to Chi-Chi, especially that girl from the Wangxing funeral parlor. But Ningguang wasn't just anyone. She had visited Chi-Chi several times before. Fine, Guei muttered. Follow me. He led us to the consultation room at the back of Bubu Pharmacy. Since it was late, there were no patients around. It was the perfect place for a quiet talk. Chi-Chi, how have you been lately? Ningguang asked softly. The floating wooden crate behind her settled onto the floor with a heavy thud and a metallic clatter. Chi-Chi turned around, her large, pale eyes scanning Ningguang's face for a long time. I'm sorry, Chi-Chi said, her voice dropping with disappointment. I think I forgot you. She had a faint memory of Ningguang's face, which meant they had definitely met, but her zombie brain was like a sieve. Nothing stayed for long. Wait a moment, Chi-Chi whispered. I will check my notebook. She pulled out a small, worn diary and flipped to the page labeled Must Remember. Her eyes moved across the lines, asterisk big. Very white. Very yellow, asterisk. Are you Lady Ningguang of the Tianquan? She asked tentatively. Ningguang looked like she wanted to grab that notebook and see what else was written in there, but she held back. She knew this little herb gatherer was far more dangerous than she looked. It's me, Ningguang replied with a smile. A friend of yours asked me to bring you a gift. With a wave of her hand, the wooden crate snapped open. Inside were rows of bottles and jars. Is this coconut milk? Chi-Chi asked. Even though it was her favorite thing in the world, she didn't rush. She waited for Ningguang's nod before taking a bottle and drinking it down in one go. How does it taste? Ningguang asked. I don't know. Chi-Chi replied flatly. I can't taste anything. No, it is coconut milk. I like it. Ningguang reached out and gently wiped a milk stain from the corner of the girl's mouth. Xiaobai asked me to bring this to you. Do you remember him? Xiaobai. Chi-Chi tilted her head. Is that Mr. Baiju? No, Ningguang said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Not Baiju. Another Xiaobai, your old friend. She didn't know how to explain a past life to a zombie who couldn't remember yesterday. Old friend. Chi-Chi looked lost. I don't know. If it was a long time ago, I didn't have a notebook yet. I probably forgot him. She looked devastated, the same way she did when Baiju failed to find a cocoa goat for her. But then, she pulled out a brush. With slow, careful strokes, she wrote a new entry in her diary. Asterisk Xiaobai, Chi-Chi's good friend. Chi-Chi must not forget again. Asterisk. While Ningguang dealt with the past in Liyue, I was waking up to the future in Inazuma. The first rays of sunlight hit my face, pulling me out of a deep sleep. I opened my eyes to see several electro-bats circling above me, chasing away a group of curious hilichurls. I made quick work of the monsters and looked toward the tent. Xenia had drunk way too much firewater last night, so I had taken the first watch. Honestly, I just wasn't comfortable sleeping in the same tent as her. I might be a Fatui harbinger now, but deep down, I still had the soul of a proper Liyue man. I wasn't going to take advantage of her. I had, however, left a secret mark on her. With that tracker, I could find her any time I wanted to catch up. I stretched my limbs and looked around. Xenia was already gone. She had left some food by the pot, a handwritten note, and a crude, hand-drawn map. As a member of the Fatui skirmishers, she had her own missions to attend to. I smiled at her messy but bold handwriting. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a few jars of jam I'd brought from Snezhnaya. After living there so long, I hadn't grown fond of their vodka, but I loved their jam. I left them by the fire as a thank you gift. I studied her abstract map and realized where I was. Last night, I had chased that little thief right out of Ritu. Then, Kuju Sarah had led me through the forest until I ended up near MT. Yogo. No wonder the mountain looked familiar. I was glad I hadn't climbed it on a whim. I wasn't ready to face that 500-year-old blood fox, Yemiko, just yet. I started heading back toward Ritu, taking my time. I just needed to be back before dark. It wasn't every day I got to see the sights of Inazuma before the Raiden Shogun tried to kill me. I even passed a fox statue and waved hello to a shrine maiden wearing a fox mask. Just as I was leaving Konda village, I heard movement behind me. Without thinking, I vanished. This was my greatest asset as the instructor of the debt collectors, stealth. 1 second I was there, the next I was a ghost. My movement speed spiked, and my next strike was guaranteed to be a lethal critical hit. Even the other harbingers couldn't sense my presence when I did this. I remembered when the Tsaritsa herself found out about my ability. She had visited the training camp just to see it. The jester told me later that after seeing me disappear, the Empress had only said one thing. Interesting. Shortly after I was promoted to the 12th Harbinger, I began to suspect that my stealth was absolute. I truly believe that even the 7 archons couldn't see through my veil. I didn't have to wait long to test that theory. A group of ronin, dressed in tattered vagabond clothes and clutching long katanas, drifted into my line of sight. I stayed perfectly still. They weren't looking for me. In fact, they didn't even notice I was there. Their faces were grim as they sprinted toward the border between Narukami Island and Ritu. In the Fatui, we despise these no-bushi. They have no honor left as samurai. They're vultures who collaborate with the treasure hoarders for a few extra mora. Seeing them gathered in such a large group piqued my interest. I used my stealth to shadow them. My invisibility wasn't permanent, so I kept a safe distance to avoid detection. It wasn't that I couldn't kill them, I just didn't want to make a scene yet. The sound of clashing steel and war cries soon echoed from the path ahead. My stealth wore off just as I reached a thicket near the clearing. I was about to refresh my invisibility when I felt a strange presence at my feet. I looked down. A snow-white cat was crouching right next to me, hiding in the exact same spot. It had sapphire blue eyes that stared at me with intense wariness. Wait, this cat looked familiar. 2 specific names flashed through my mind. As the white cat watched me with wide, terrified eyes, I vanished again. This time, I scooped the little creature up and hurried toward the battlefield. I felt it before I saw it. A refreshing breeze swept through the trees, followed immediately by the crackle of blinding purple lightning. No matter how tough the no-bushi thought they were no match for 2 ronin carrying visions. By the time I arrived, the one-sided slaughter was over. No-bushi lay scattered across the dirt. It was a clear warning. These 2 peaceful-looking youths were far more dangerous than they appeared. The taller boy sheathed his blade. He was biting on a piece of foxtail grass, looking completely unbothered by the fight he'd just finished. Sparks of electricity still danced on his sword. He was an electro user. When he saw the white cat sprinting toward him, he instinctively reached out his arm, expecting it to climb onto his shoulder like usual. Instead, the cat panicked. It dived into his robes, trembling and trying to bury itself in his chest. The boy's relaxed posture vanished. He gripped his hilt again. "Friend, since you're already here, why not come out and talk?" He held the cat with one arm, ready to draw his steel with the other. His cat didn't even react like this when facing monsters. Whoever was in the shadows had to be powerful. The other boy, a shorter youth with a vision that glowed with the teal light of a Nemo, snapped to attention. He scanned the area, his eyes sharp. As a wind user, he was sensitive to the slightest vibration in the air. But the wandering winds told him nothing. There was no one there. "Are you seeing things?" the Anemo boy started to ask. Before he could finish, I flickered into existence right in front of them. I stood there, wearing my strange mask, appearing like a ghost out of thin air. There had been no sound, no elemental trace. It defied everything they knew about combat arts. Both of them broke into a cold sweat simultaneously. They realized that if I had wanted to assassinate them, they would already be dead. "Relax," I said calmly. A long, melodic tune began to drift on the wind, so beautiful that even the chatter of the birds died down. The Anemo boy was playing a leaf, turning a simple piece of greenery into a masterpiece of sound. Despite the music, I could feel the taller boy's resistance. He saw the Fatui insignia on my gear and pulled back, clutching his white cat as he trailed behind us, clearly unwilling to join the conversation. The older boy, the one with the Anemo vision, was much more composed. He walked side by side with me, his questions casual but calculated. He acted friendly, but I noticed he had handed the cat to his friend. It freed his hands. It made it easier for him to draw his sword. "You're a foreigner, aren't you?" he asked. "Liyue and Inazuma people don't look that different, though Liyue folk tend to be a bit taller." I shrugged. "How can you tell?" He glanced at the delusion hanging from my waist and smiled. "In Inazuma, nobody dares to wear a vision so openly." He was right. I was practically begging for attention. In this country, that was a death sentence. He and his friend had been hunted by Nobushi just for using a tiny bit of elemental power. The vision hunt decree was no joke. "If they want it, they can try to take it," I said. "It doesn't matter to me. I wasn't a vision wielder anyway. I didn't rely on divine favor." I did wonder if the Tsaritsa would be angry if I lost my delusion, though. It wasn't just a tool, it was a badge of honor. Mine was special, It wasn't a mass-produced piece. It was gifted by the Empress herself and pinned to my chest by the jester. The boy looked at me with a hint of genuine envy. You're quite free-spirited. You're right, though. A vision isn't the source of strength, it's the proof of it. It symbolizes a mortal's desire to keep moving forward. But for us samurai, our confidence has always been in the blade. He sighed. He admired my casual attitude, but he couldn't replicate it. To lose a vision in Inazuma was to lose your ambition, your very hope. And this land needed hope more than anything. Without it, eternity was just an endless, living hell. Foreigner, the boy said, clutching his sword as he looked toward the horizon. Have you ever heard of the Muzu no Hidotachi? My expression soured. Heard of it? I knew it all too well. My senior, Signora, was destined to die by that very blade. But based on how things were going, it looked like I might be the one standing in its path instead. I replied. In fact, I was just wondering, how does one go about blocking a strike like that? The boy looked at me, stunned. The Muzu no Hidotachi was the pinnacle of the Raiden Shogun's martial arts. It was the ultimate symbol of her power, seen only when divine punishment descended. He clearly hadn't expected anyone else to be crazy enough to share his obsession. I never expected that the first person I'd meet in this country would be someone I'd eventually have to face. As a Fatui harbinger, I was part of the very organization that indirectly pushed for the Vision Hunt decree. One day, we would be enemies. It was inevitable. The words we spoke were the same, but our meanings were worlds apart. He couldn't avoid this fate. I simply chose not to. Can I ask you a question? I asked. We had grown comfortable enough during our walk for small talk. Please, go ahead, the boy replied. What's your name? That was one of the reasons I decided to walk with them. The Fatui have done plenty of terrible things. We've crushed lives and left nothing behind. If I couldn't save this man from his destiny, the least I could do was learn his name. The boy's expression stiffened. A hint of hesitation crossed his face. These were dark times in Inazuma. Giving your real name to a stranger was asking for trouble. He wasn't the type of person who liked to lie, but he wasn't ready to be honest either. If you don't want to say, forget it, I said, waving it off. I won't force you. I knew my reputation. Being a member of the Fatui was enough to make anyone run the other way. Being an executive was even worse. I thought back to our subordinates, like that cryo gunner who just wanted to pick berries in Liyue. I wondered if one day Ganyu would blast me with a cryo arrow just because I stepped into Liyue harbor with my left foot first. My casual attitude seemed to put him at ease. The tension between us bled away as we continued talking. But every journey has an end, especially one between strangers. We eventually reached a fork in the road. If you run into trouble, come to Ritu, I told the two young men. They were far too composed for their age. I'll likely be staying there for a while. I meant it. As a harbinger, I had enough power to protect them, provided the Raiden Shogun hadn't put them on a most wanted list yet. Life is like a mountain path. It has its peaks and valleys. Even in the depths of misery, there's a chance to touch the clouds. Thank you for the kindness, the boy said, taking the white cat back from his friend. Perhaps we'll meet again if fate allows. Maybe my sincerity finally reached him. At the moment of parting, he let down his guard. But even then, his name remained a mystery. Fate, huh? I watched them disappear into the forest, their straw hats bobbing as they walked. I didn't know if fate would bring us back together, but I knew I could find them whenever I wanted. While we were walking, I had already marked them. As long as they stayed within a certain range of me, I'd know exactly where they were. It was a handy trick, and luckily, I hadn't run out of uses for it yet. Once they were gone from my senses, I turned toward my own path. Riti used to be a tourist paradise before the Sakoku decree. It was the gateway to Inazuma, the face of the nation. Red maple leaves and blue roof tiles created a beautiful landscape. But the people living there didn't match the scenery. The foreign merchants trapped here looked miserable. Even the locals were drowning in worry. The lockdown had cut off their income entirely. Some had picked up their old fishing nets just to survive, but the Kanto Commission soldiers didn't care. They were vultures. They exploited everyone, even their own countrymen. As I approached the main road connecting Ritu to Narukami Island, I saw a blond man blocked by a group of soldiers. He looked like a foreigner, but he was dressed in high-quality Inazuman attire. Most notably, a pyro vision hung prominently at his waist. Like the boy I met earlier said, very few people in Inazuma were brave enough to flaunt a vision. You either had to be someone like me, who didn't care, or someone with serious power. I watched him. Unlike the stiff locals, this man knew how to handle people. He talked to the soldiers with a bright, easy smile. His hands moved subtly, likely slipping them something under the table. Within minutes, the soldiers' stern faces melted into grins. They were acting like old friends. It was a rare sight. Usually, foreigners were just lemons for these bloodsuckers to squeeze. But this man was different. He was navigating the lockdown like it was a game.